Hello everyone, I am Chirag Thakkar, commissioning editor at Roli Books, and you're watching this in collaboration between Roli Pulse, brought to you by Roli Books as well as Newslaundry. This is the fifth episode of our specially curated video series on the media landscape in India. If you haven't already, please go press the bell icon and subscribe to Roli Books and Newslaundry on YouTube, where you will find the other four episodes of this series. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Today, we're going to be talking about viral news, listicles, and content that appeals to largely young, uber urban, millennial, post millennial, and Gen Z audiences. What are some of the strategies that content platforms are looking at? What's the fleeting trends that is working today? What's working? What's not? Moderating this specially curated media series with Roli Pulse and Newslaundry is Abhinandan Sekhri. And Abhinandan is going to be in conversation with Sattvik Mishra, Pragya Tiwari, and Andre Borges. Sattvik Mishra started ScoopWhoop.com as an experiment along with some friends in August 2013. In less than 3 months, the media company got to 3 million monthly users. Since then, ScoopWhoop has grown from an experiment to India's largest new age media company. As of today, about 40 million Indians consume ScoopWhoop content in a month. Pragya Tiwari is a journalist and policy consultant with over 15 years of experience in journalism. She has led publications such as Vice India, Tehelka, and The Big Indian Picture as an editor, and has contributed her writings and reportage to several Indian and international publications such as Hindustan Times, Mint Lounge, Elle, The New York Times, and Al Jazeera. Andre Borges has been a journalist for about 8 years now. Over the last few years, he's ventured into video production and content creation, first at BuzzFeed India, handling their political and cultural vertical dialogue, and of late at Pocket Aces with their nonfiction department Nutshell. Abhinandan Sekhri is co-founder of Newslaundry, a reader-supported independent news media organization. So welcome to this chat, all of you. Abhinandan, why don't you get us started?
Thanks, Chirag. So I'll get straight into it, and I'd like to start with you, Sattvik. Since you started this as an experiment, what was the idea of the experiment? What was your template? And how has that experiment evolved? Because I use news in a narrow sense. Like for me, content and news are two separate things. So I kind of dislike it when both of them are, put together when we speak at platforms, and both have their own space and their own seriousness and their own standard operating procedure.
Yeah.
What was your product when you started off with it? And what is it now? And what are the transitions you've made? And where does news fit in?
So, so we started ScoopWhoop in 2013 when I was in an advertising job. I was a copywriter with an advertising agency called Web Chutney. And having spent 4 years at Web Chutney, I fairly understood how viral videos or content is sort of produced and how it's created and what are the best practices to create it. But as advertising is, it also gets very boring very quickly because most of the time you get to work on brochures and not TVCs. So having spent 4 years at Web Chutney, we figured that, there is something that that's happening globally where there are a lot of new media companies that have come up that are creating content for the millennials, which is slightly different from how traditional media companies are doing it. And we felt that there's there isn't a company in India that's creating content keeping young India in mind. Back then, I remember most of the digital content was just a copy paste of what's going on their print editions. So that's why we felt there was an opportunity to sort of create content for young Indians, and we launched the site over a period of 48 hours. I still remember, I think it was the 15th to the 14th of August 2013 when we launched the website. And the idea back then, we were advertising guys, right? So we didn't really understand how publication works or how the concept of publishing as a business is run. That point in time, the idea really was to throw things at the wall, see what works, what sticks, what comes back. And we realized that, as long as there are 2 or 3 pillars that we stay true to, we can expect the content to travel wider and faster. These were very few simple pillars of content that I don't think has changed over the last 3-4 years. I think their execution style has changed. Maybe their understanding has changed in some way, but those pillars haven't changed. So one pillar that we very actively sort of believe in is that news is very subjective. And this is where sort of I slightly disagree with you, Abhinandan. I think news has largely over the last decades has been dictated by a bunch of editors who sit in a room and decide and dictate what news should look like. So they'll say that, politics is very important, so we'll put it on the front page. Bollywood is not that important, so we'll put it on page 3. Sports is important, but it's not as important as politics, so it'll go on the last page of the newspaper. And that's essentially how your newspaper looks like. We at ScoopWhoop believe that news is very subjective. If I am a Manchester United fan, then what happens in a match between Manchester United and Chelsea is the biggest news piece for me for that day. Or if I'm a Game of Thrones fan, a death in a Game of Thrones episode is the largest piece of news for me. Similarly, if I am into politics and I really like following politics, then what Narendra Modi does is important to me. So we believe that you can't dictate news to your users. You can't tell them that, okay, this is news and this is not news. I think news is very subjective. And that's something that we follow at ScoopWhoop very religiously. We believe that there is space for all kinds of news. Different people want different content and they have different definitions of news. So that's one. The second part, of course, is that how do we make news or content pieces more consumable, right? And there are certain best practices that you can do. So, for example, one of the things that we focus on is how to package the news piece. So, jitna time story likhne mein jata hai, I would assume that twice the amount of time goes into what the feature image should look like, what the headline should look like. Because you can write a great piece, but if it's not presented well, then it loses its effectiveness. So a considerable amount of time is spent in trying to figure out how the story should look. What are the images we have to use? What is the format we should use? So essentially what we're trying to answer is how can we make the user consume our content and to get him to click on our content. And then the merit of the story sort of takes the story wider and faster. I think the third thing is more of a hiring policy that we have, which we believe is that only X can write for X. Essentially, what that means is that we believe that, a 40-year-old can't write for a 20-year-old. 18-year-old in Delhi can't write for a 30-year-old in Bhopal. A girl brought up in a small town can write for girls in small towns. So diversity in a newsroom is very important. We like to hire people from different backgrounds so that they can talk about their experiences and they can appeal to many communities that they represent. So say, for example, if I have to write a story of living in Delhi, I'm sure Andre can't write it, right? Because he hasn't, he's a Bombay guy. So for us, I think these three pillars haven't really changed over the last 6-7 years. I think execution and understanding of them have changed. We tried doing news, but the news model is so broken that we didn't see a reason to sort of continue investing in news. It's the return of investment is very low because you have to see, the thing is that if you do news, you have to do news really well. Otherwise, there's no point of doing news. You have to invest in quality people. You have to invest in stringers. You have to invest in good wires. But the monetization of news is still very messed up. It doesn't give you the kind of returns that it does. So that's why we've moved away from news. But our definition of news is very different. Our definition of news is that everything is news as long as it's news for certain demographics and they think that what they're consuming is what they really want. So essentially that's how we've been. So nothing's really changed over the last 7 years, except for execution, I'm guessing.
Okay, I'll come back to the content is news and all news is content piece a little later on this. Of course, Pragya will want to weigh in on that probably. Pragya, you have been a journalist for all your life. Not all your life, okay, most of your life.
As soon as I was born.
Okay, all your adult professional life, fine. You can nitpick and embarrass me, but now Vice was something I remember when I watched the earlier Vice documentaries, whether it was going, rocket launcher shopping in the Arms Bazaar of Peshawar kind of thing. Like it was like even hardcore reporters were like, whoa, that's amazing. But then it went more and more, sensational, but not newsworthy. And, that's where I come to news versus content. And you headed Vice here. What was your mandate? What did you imagine you want to do with Vice? What do you think is happening Vice worldwide? Is it still in the news space as I define news? And not Sattvik, and we'll have to make the distinction for this conversation. And is your approach different when you are, let's say in a newsroom at Tehelka, or you're writing for all the newspapers or news platforms you are here, and when you were setting up a strategy for Vice? What's the difference and why?
So very quickly, Vice internationally, globally, of course, they started with, they first started as a Time Out kind of magazine. That was just telling you what is happening in the underground culture scene. That was the origin of Vice. It was a magazine that was just telling you where to go and catch gigs that nobody else talks about, right? For young people. And then, of course, it moved into many different spaces. But Vice globally had a very clear horses for courses policy, somewhat like what Sattvik has been talking about, that different people can come to the platform expecting to consume different stuff. So it also had your very, the regular weed column or, of news, which was everything on you want to know on weed. You want to cook with weed. You want to talk about legalization of marijuana. You want to talk about how people got, wasted on weed. It also had serious news. It also had political columns. It had the documentaries. It had the videos. So it had all of that. That was the idea. I'm just telling you what the idea was. Whether or not it worked is a different question, and we might come to that. So the whole thing was a horses to courses thing, but not going beyond what maybe ScoopWhoop was doing or whatever, not just in terms of what different people are offered, but also different platforms. So, Vice had, it had many satellite sort of publications, right? So they had a fashion publication, they had two music publications, so there was this whole, they had an entire Munchies, which is just dedicated to food. Then they were partnering with HBO just to do news. Then, of course, they were doing documentaries. They were, so there was just a whole bunch of different things that Vice was doing under one umbrella. And the idea was that whatever you want, you come to us for, you'll get it. Right? So different people can come for different things. Now, that had grown, organically and over time in the US, and transplanting that model to India overnight would not have worked. It just couldn't possibly have worked. So the mandate very clearly was quality journalism for younger people, which I was brought in on. Video as well as text, audio as well. However, the other big difference from America and India was the funds available to us, the team available to us. I had 6 people. He had 600 people, have 600 people. So obviously you could not translate that mandate directly, and you had to find what avatar it would take in India, what it would mean in India. And unfortunately, what ends up happening, and I've been in this position twice in my life, and at 2 very interesting points in my life. When I was brought on board Tehelka was just a magazine, and Tehelka.com essentially was the magazine being uploaded on the website weekly, right? And when I was hired, it was to make it a separate entity. At that point in time, other than Rediff, we didn't really have any competition in terms of, Scroll wasn't around, Wire wasn't around, Newslaundry wasn't around, nothing really was around on the scene. And we had to kind of feel our way around to see what would the model be, what would we do. Next time I was in this position was when I was doing Vice, when there was a saturated market. And you had to really drill down and niche down to what it is that would translate into what Vice is doing and what we want to do into a good economic model. I realized through the process of doing this through Vice is that there is a massive disconnect between the people who are thinking about marketing and the people who are thinking about editorial. And when that exists, ironically, we were brought up to believe, I am from that generation, that there should be a Chinese wall between the marketing guys and the editorial guys. Mm-hmm. Through the process of Vice, I realized that idea is completely outdated. You need the editor to be the CEO, or you need the CEO to be the editor. And if that does not happen, then you cannot have any successful model.
In any kind of...
In any, I mean, in the digital space, you can still have, you know, a New York Times, a legacy media or whatever, but definitely not in the digital space and definitely not in India. And I'm very convinced about that now.
I completely agree with Pragya here. I think it's very easy to create content, but it's very difficult to create content businesses. And if, once you start seeing content as a content business, then there are 1,000 permutation combinations, 1,000 challenges that you need to take care of. And that's exactly what Pragya is also saying, that marketing and editorial have to have some sort of seamless integration together for a business to thrive.
Sure. I'll come to that. And I'll also come to, you know, why would they pick Pragya, who's basically a journalist, and not say someone like Samir Nair? He's the guy, right? It stars when, you know, the Peter Mukherjee's team that made Star this big content hub. Why would they not pick someone who's, you know, cornered market with Saas Bahu and Sazish, if that's the idea? But I'll just come to that. So just think about that. Andre, you have been a journalist, and you also create, I've seen your videos on, you know, what they call viral videos. I don't know what the correct terminology is now. When you, you know, I mean, do you still describe yourself as a journalist, or do you describe yourself as a content creator or a producer? What in your mind is the distinction? And what in your mind is the distinction in how you approach journalism as I describe it, or the kind of listicles which BuzzFeed is known for, you know, that the top 10 reasons to, you know, live in Delhi or live in Bombay?
I personally, I mean, I feel like putting people in boxes on the internet right now doesn't make sense. I do agree that when you say journalist, the information should be verified, the information should have sources, the information should have groundwork behind it and stuff like that. But I don't see a reason why a content creator can't also be a journalist. In terms of how they're putting up their content. So I'll give you an example. When we created dialogue for BuzzFeed, the whole aim was because essays, you know, long form pieces about things that were happening in the country and identities and stuff like that started doing really, really well on the website. And we had already started a video department that was doing, you know, entertainment videos and stuff like that. So when Rega and I, Rega Jha, who was the editor-in-chief at that time, we discussed it, and she was like, why don't we open, you know, a space where we can basically make long form essays as videos. We started doing that at first, which we called social news videos, which were things that were happening on the internet, general social issues, you know, all-encompassing issues. And then from that, I decided that we should also tackle like something that's huge in the country. And given that I already had sources from my career as a journalist, I had the means to contact, you know, the cops or contact, you know, people involved in the incident, stuff like that. So we could have vetted sources and create stuff on, say, Judge Loya or you know, stuff that happened in Thoothukudi back in the day. Now the thing is, we couldn't write. I didn't write the video as a you know, straight fact news piece because I knew the audience that BuzzFeed had, which was much younger people. So for me to break down what the issue was, I had to make it conversational, and I had to add in elements that we use this thing at BuzzFeed where we say, if you're making something, you have to make it as if you're talking to a friend. So the language has to be easily digestible. It has to be very different from how a news report would be. And I think that's the distinction with the content that I create versus, you know, say something on like a legacy media like The Hindu or like HT or whatever it is. I think the problem that we faced strongly was the whole thing that Pragya was talking about, where it's editorial versus advertising. Because BuzzFeed came here as an entertainment company, and we came here without any affiliation to, say, a Times of India or, you know, any mainstream news organization in India. So by that logic, we could only make entertainment content, and we started making news-based or, you know, slightly hard news-based content. We were later on told, as the content started gaining steam, I think dialogue gained a lot of traction on Facebook and Twitter. And because of that, we were actually informed that, you know, you can't actually make news because by BuzzFeed, I wasn't a BuzzFeed journalist. Like, I wasn't part of BuzzFeed News. So technically, we couldn't be making news in India. which is why I'm sure that a lot of you have seen, like, I mean, I've left BuzzFeed now, but like their touch upon news content and touch upon what's happening in the world has completely gone down. Because they've gone back basically to their roots, which is creating only entertainment content and only touching upon, identities and relatability and stuff like that. I think that ScoopWhoop and Newslaundry and stuff like that are doing exactly the same thing, where they're picking news that would, attain to different demographics of the population. Like I've seen ScoopWhoop do stickers and the funny videos and stuff like that, but I've also seen great journalism happen on ScoopWhoop. And Newslaundry has taken, like Meghnad and stuff, has taken cues from being very conversational. There are lots of constitutional things that I don't understand, but I understand it after watching Meghnad's videos. So I think there isn't a distinction as such in terms of how or where you're getting your news. I feel like what is the best for you to understand that topic and for you to gain more awareness is what a lot of the platforms are doing these days. I feel like a lot of young people are understanding very conversational videos rather than reading like an op-ed or a think piece, which might work for the older lot that have more information about the subject. So content creation and journalism for me doesn't necessarily have to be two different things.
Okay, so I'll just lay the context of the next talking point, because I think on one thing I disagree with, I think all of you, is that news is a very different piece. And I'll tell you why I say that. Having set a production house, and I used to make food and travel shows for channels, which is what I did for most of my professional life until I started Newslaundry. And this is not just content and marketing, is the risk. The risk with news is huge. You're taking on powers that could shut you down. Now, would I want to, when I was making Highway My Plate and Twist of Taste with Vineet Bhatia and, Roti Rasta India, that risk was not part of my plan. There was no cost associated with it. So the professionals I would get, the due diligence I would have, instead of heeng maine jeera bol diya, I'm not getting a legal notice for that. Lekin Judge X ki jagah maine Judge Y bol diya, I risk being shut down. So the whole approach to your enterprise, and I'm talking about from an entrepreneurial point of view, which I guess is more Sattvik and me are similar on that. The strategy you deploy for hiring people, the kind of costs you put aside for different, spends is very different in news. I think what to me goes against what the internet makes possible is it makes it possible to have niche audiences that when I used to make TV shows, studio executives, what is your TG target group, target audience? By kuch idea nahi, I want to make a show, you'd pay any shit. They'd say, theek hai, let's do. But you did not seriously know whether young people would like your show or whether older people would like your show. Eventually, if it did well, it did well. And honestly, till date, I don't think any studio executive had any idea that who is watching this show. But with the internet, you have niche products for niche audiences. So when you say that people can come on Vice or ScoopWhoop and we'll cater to everyone. If you're interested in weed, you can get weed. If you're interested in politics, get politics. I don't see how a commercial proposition can be made on that back, because then there is no incentive to spend on ground reportage where traffic is your only metric. And that is one logic to the commercial viability of your product. So from commercial viability to your hiring policy to your spend, isn't it very different? And secondly, no one can cater to everybody. And the internet actually, in my view, is a tool that makes it possible not to go down the broadcast route. That if I want the market, I have to have Big Boss or KBC. I have to have it's an all or nothing. So that's the context. So on that, Pragya, you come in first. When you said that, we'd like to catch everybody's attention and we have something for everyone, is that really possible? And if someone gave you that mandate, I take it, if I was getting paid by channels like I would for shows, but in my head, I knew that's not a sensible proposition.
Okay. Quick points, okay, because this is a big topic. Completely agree with you. Sadly, do not disagree with you on this. News and content are completely different things, completely different beasts, okay? I have been a news editor with the Helka, and I can give you examples on what that involves when you're an editor with news. And this is the first time we're going into a website and digital news, so which means it has to be live. You can't wait till tomorrow morning to publish something. Okay, and the challenges are entirely different. I was sent Radia tapes. I said no. I took a risk. Open published it. You're making those kinds of decisions, right? That's just one example, right? But I can give you 100 such examples of what that entails, and what you say yes to, what you say no to, how you report it, your responsibility towards your journalists, not just towards the news. I mean, everything. It's a completely different kettle of fish. Okay, it has nothing to do with content. When it comes to Vice, therefore, I knew that model was not going to work in India. So what I wanted to do was, again, very much like Sattvik, the first thing I said was we're not doing news, because same reasons that Sattvik spoke about, which I don't need to go into again because we've already got them. You know, it's not viable. We also decided we're not going to do Bollywood at all, you know, because again, it was a saturated market. There was nothing that we could offer unless it was a very, you know, sideways piece. We would not touch it. Okay, which seems counterintuitive. You've left out news. You've left out Bollywood. Now, you then really better be sure that whatever it is that you're coming up with, people want. And this is what the basic idea was, that you keep the sensationalism of Vice, but you take that sort of viral feel of content and apply it to more substantial content, right? So let me give you an example, which will explain this better than my rambling on and on. I commissioned a story, a first-person account by an ABVP student leader who is gay. And it's from RSS. Okay. What his struggle has been, why he joined the RSS, why he supports them, what it is like for him to be gay and not tell people in the ABVP that he's gay. Now, when you put that out as a headline, it is, of course, it's slightly clickbaity, right? But at the same time, it really goes into a lot of very serious, substantial issues about political identity, sexual identity, the intersections between them, what young people are grappling with, okay? Then we'd done a story, these were all canned, by the way, but we spoke to about, the mandate was to speak to about 5,000 young Muslims across the country and ask them what their anxieties are today, boys and girls. What is it that they feel anxious about, right? And then we were clubbing these anxieties into different corners. We were approaching sex in a very similar way. And sex was going to be a massive, massive part of what we were doing, but using sensationalism to deliver really meaty, substantial pieces that were saying a lot about the world that we were living in, and also representative of a wide array of Indians, not just the Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore Indian, you know, an Indian in Aligarh, an Indian in Kanpur, an Indian everywhere. That was the broad idea. However, to come back to what I was saying earlier, you need that synchronicity of vision to be able to market this. Right now, one of the people who we got for marketing was from ScoopWhoop. The other person who was leading the marketing effort, who was our CEO, was from India Times. Now, you cannot, ScoopWhoop does what it does it really, really well, but you cannot use that to market this content. And I think it became increasingly obvious that the only person who can actually market this content is me and my team. Yeah. Because we're the only people who really believe in this content. And we are the people who are really thinking about who's this going to, you know, again, hiring decisions are coming into it. What do young people want to hear? We're talking to these young people. We're reporting this, right? So keeping reporting, keeping politics, but changing the form of it and keeping sensationalism. I still believe it could have worked. But we didn't have that kind of belief from, and slowly became skewed. Like the first partner who wanted to come on board was Google. And they were like, we don't want to do a series on sex, which is what we were launching with. So it just became very skewed with them coming and telling us, you can't do this and you can't do that and don't do this and don't do that. And, you know, and at the end that completely fell apart. And that's why I guess Vice is where it is right now.
So Sattvik, yeah, costs versus revenues, hiring decisions, isn't it very different, the entire logic of the two?
See, I think I'll try to give you a sense of how do we look at content. And there's another point I want to make on journalism versus news, but I think I'll sort of discuss this first. See, I think what keeps the light on at ScoopWhoop is the 90% of the content that we do. And that 90% is our bread and butter. It's geared towards getting clicks, getting users to the website. It has a direct impact to the revenue. Because we're able to do that 90% really well, we're able to invest 10% into things that we believe should be invested in. So, say for example, some of the stuff that Sandesh does on ScoopWhoop Unscripted. Now, that thing doesn't really make any money for us, except for a few dollars that come from YouTube, and that's peanut. I mean, we all know what YouTube revenue sharing metrics are. But we're able to, that 90% of content that we create, which is geared towards sports, travel, pop culture, Bollywood, entertainment, that's the one that's bringing all the users to the website. That's what's paying for our salary, that's what's paying for the office rent, that's what's taking the company forward. The other 10% is the credibility builder, as we like to call within ScoopWhoop. Invest in properties that you believe are the topics that you want to talk about, that you would personally be a fan of, and also that builds credibility for the brand. And I think a large part of the success of ScoopWhoop has been in trying to make this 90-10 split work very well for us. Some of the documentaries that, for example, we worked with you, Abhinandan, on Chase, that didn't make any money, but there was almost a CR of investment in that. Now, how do you account? Because at the end of the day, when you look at the P&L, how do you account for expenditures in that direction? I think that only works if you. And I think most content businesses, I think if they're able to figure out that what is the 90%, what is the 10%, I think they'll be at a good spot. And I mean that's the way we look at and sort of this then defines how we hire, what is our editorial strategy, what is our content strategy, how do we think of the next quarter. So everything then depends on this 90-10 split, and I think we're able to do that well.
If you can I can just squeeze one more in there. Then running a pretty successful media company, which is pretty large. Let me pull further out. Let's look at it just from a valuation and as an entrepreneurial venture game. When you go pitch this to an investor, how do you explain the risk if you say we also do news? Because then the value proposition from an investment point of view completely gets defeated, right?
Yeah, but we don't do journalism, Abhinandan. I think there is a big difference between journalism and news. I mean, everyone's doing news. Very few people in this country are doing journalism. We look at it like that, right? We're a news and media company. We're a news and entertainment company. We're not a journalism company. We don't do what The Wire does. We don't do what Newslaundry does. We don't do what Print does. We are in the business of creating content.
But does it impact how investors look at you? Are they more wary of touching you if you use news? Even forget journalism, even using news. Investors
only look at one thing, right? That they only look at numbers. How many people come to your platform? What is your revenue potential, and how big can this be? I don't think they really give a fuck about what content you're doing. I mean, there are media companies that are way more valuable than ScoopWhoop, who are doing what I would personally call cringe content. But then who am I to sort of, as I said, the content is very subjective. So they don't really care about it. Of course, there are some challenges with that FDI rule where foreign investment in news companies can only be a certain percentage. So anyway, for any Indian media company that's looking to raise money, positioning itself as a news and journalism product is a bad idea.
Well, yeah, I think we should actually do one purely on the regulatory framework, Chirag, because it is so bizarre that if someone can explain that. So now, coming to the whole journalism versus content thing, one is from an entrepreneurial point of view. As a professional who is, let's say, producing stuff for BuzzFeed, what Sattvik called the credibility builder, for us, it's also 90-10. Our fun videos, our mocking videos and stuff, that's 10% of our content. 90% of our stuff is reports. And the traffic on our fun stuff is way more than on our reports. But that 10% is to suck them in for this 90%. And yours, I guess it's the other way around.
Yeah,
but Abhinandan, you have a better revenue model, which is subscription. I wish I had invested in a subscription model 5 years back. We have a robust revenue model. We are unfortunately dependent on advertising.
Yeah, it's never too late. But we should exchange notes. It's been a good 2020 for us, at least on the subscription front. So Andre, are you concerned about how you are perceived by, let's say, a prospective, commissioner of content, or a commissioner of someone wants to commission a series? Are you a journalist? Are you a content creator? Do you think it kind of compromises you one way or the other? Because I know I'm told all the time that you shouldn't appear in these funny videos of Nisha to see, or someday when someone go make a presentation, ye to wo joker hai jo aata hai. Now I see where that is coming from. Maybe it's coming from a good place that this guy makes bad jokes on television, on video. So what kind of a CEO is he? And maybe there's a point to that. Are you worried about credibility vis-a-vis virality?
So actually, when I started doing, when I started acting in videos and stuff for BuzzFeed, it was always in sketches and what we called IRLs, which is basically like food taste tests and stuff like that. And then when I wanted to venture more and more into doing quote unquote credible stuff, where we would talk about a large systemic issue like fairness claims or something like that, or when you're talking about things that happen in the media landscape in India, I did get a lot of feedback from a lot of people saying you should stop acting in sketches and stuff like that, where it'll reduce your credibility or people won't take you seriously and stuff like that. Personally, I don't feel like that should be a thing. I can be a very smart and credible person and also be hilarious. And in these sketches and stuff like that, it's not like that is it shouldn't diminish another part of my personality. Like I'll take the example of John Oliver. Like he's extremely funny, and a lot of his work has made actual change, systemic change in the US. And I don't think people see him. He keeps saying he's not a journalist, but I don't think they see him as either or. I think he's just late night comedy is a very good.
There's a new space, basically.
It's a new space. Yeah, it's a very good. I mean, I think it's the way forward for a lot of people to understand and absorb different kinds of information and awareness about what's happening in their country and the world. But yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of what Sattvik said, which is basically like the 90-10 thing. So even at BuzzFeed, what had happened was BuzzFeed News doesn't make any money. It's a source of credibility for the brand. So a lot of the money that was made from, like, say, Tasty or Nifty or any of the native advertising and any of the projects that BuzzFeed was doing, a lot of it was going into the news venture to hire reporters, to hire ground staff, to hire, to create facilities for this news to this thing. I also agree with Pragya, where in certain spaces it just doesn't work out. Like it just doesn't pan out, which is why I'm sure you guys have seen, like, globally also BuzzFeed has shut down a lot of news places across the world, because you spend amounts of money and time and resources, and then you see at the end of the day it is a numbers game. You will try to figure out whether it makes sense to do it for the next 5 years or not. And I think that's happening a lot with a lot of media companies across. So I think a lot of people now taking it to themselves, and I see more journalists on Twitter than actually, like, saying stuff in publications. And personally, I don't see them as less credible, because I've either worked with them in the past, or I know someone who's worked with them. I know that they're as verifiable as can be. And I think a lot of citizen journalism is going to happen more and more and more as Twitter and Instagram kind of take off, and they've boomed in the last few years. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but I'm just saying a lot of my news is consumed through social media now. I do not actually go to Newslaundry, the website. I find links on Twitter and then I click on them.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both. I think there's good and bad there. But just winding up quickly, Pragya, if you could just quickly, any concluding thoughts on which way you think this is going to evolve?
Yeah.
Is the separation going to become further, or is it going to converge?
Quick points to what different people have said. As a woman, as a girl, as somebody who started out fairly young, I've been told any number. If I had a penny for every time I'd be told you shouldn't project yourself like this, or you shouldn't project yourself like that, you have to at some point just stop caring, right? Like if you get it, can you imagine how much, like my Instagram, I shit post all the time. I only write about alcohol. I only write about fashion. And everyone and their mother and uncle has told me that nobody will take you seriously as a journalist. You have to stop writing this shit. You have to stop putting up photos of your martini. I still have my friends calling me up and saying people will think you're an alcoholic, all kinds of things. Okay. So at some point you just have to stop caring. Where I think the investment market in India when it comes to media is fairly, in my limited experience, very nascent and sort of underdeveloped. And the only thing that really works is hustle. And the first time I really learned that was when I was doing an editorial project with Caravan that I was heading. It was an events come editorial project. And I would go with Anand. Anand would be like, just come along, just to sit in the corner. And I started taking over the meetings because basically it's about reading what that guy wants or what he thinks and just making shit up on the spot about what you are going to do.
Yeah.
And projecting it in a way that will please that person. Okay. It is just entirely hustle. Okay. And you have to lie through your teeth. You have to say what the other person wants to hear. I'm sorry. That's just what the game is, at least in whatever experience I have had in this limited thing. The third thing I just want to quickly comment on is that, something that Andres brought up, which is becoming really, really a problem, because I'm also a freelance. Most of my writing is as a freelancer, right? Which means I have to be my own marketing person, in the sense that I have to make sure that my articles do well or they go whatever viral definition of viral might be, so that I keep getting work as a freelancer. But that's also its own trap. The number of people who offered me columns because my articles get read because of my Twitter following or whatever, and then said, but just bear in mind, you can't write about the RSS or Modi or whatever. I'm like, why have you come to me? Okay. I mean, this is actually Mail Today actually offered me a column saying you have to write shit about the Gandhis and say good things about Modi. We want you to do a column. I was like, but your brand is so good. So that's also, it's a huge problem, right? Like people coming to you just because you can do that, or, well, you have to do that. Finally, final point, I think is a more general point in terms of what I'm seeing trends to be. I think there is a lot of emphasis that we place on revenue models, on marketing, and therefore on virality of content in terms of how much is being shared, etc. I think a lot of problems inherently that journalism has at this point in time are being pinned onto faulty or perceivably faulty business models, right? We are not really thinking through. When we look at surveys, there's a massive crisis of trust. Massive, huge, when it comes to, there was a wonderful survey that Reuters had done in 2019 along with Oxford on Indian digital media. And the crisis of trust is huge. We are not addressing that. We are not addressing the diversity question in our newsrooms at all and how it impacts content. We are not addressing ethics codes. We are not addressing a whole bunch of different things. I mean, I can go into a long list of those, but obviously we don't have time for that. And we are, instead of fixing all over, just constantly trying to tweak the financial model. And I feel like maybe that needs a rethink.
Right. Thanks. And Sattvik, just, want to get this bit of gyan from you, because I know you really follow digital trends and all very well, much better than me. I used to learn so much in our chats with you. Is it just in my head, because I'm only following journalists and news related activities on social media, that I feel that even people who weren't associated with news are getting into the news gig? Or is the biggest chunk of digital still nothing to do with news? Is it still, Miss Malini and stuff like that? Or is it not my imagination? More people who had nothing to do with news are getting into news.
Yeah, I think the lines are blurring. I think something that Andre also said earlier. I think everyone's a news, everyone's a journalist and everyone's an entertainer these days. And I think those two have just combined. I don't think there is news without entertainment will be difficult for people to consume. And that's the trend that we see in TV news, especially in TV news. So yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think the financial models are so broken that we need to find new ways of giving news to the audience. And unfortunately, the only thing that seems to be working right now is mixing news with entertainment.
Right. So I will tell our audience that our model is quite robust and growing. Like I have said for the past 8 years, pay to keep news free, because when the public pays, the public is served. And when the advertiser pays, the advertiser is served. And if you see newspapers today, it has Kejriwal's picture, Trivendra Singh from Uttarakhand Chief Minister's picture, it has Modi ji's picture, it has Yogi Adityanath's picture. So those are the guys who paid for today's newspaper. Just putting it out there, letting you know. And when I was a reporter and, from Newstrack, Aaj Tak had started, we started a morning show called Good Morning Today. So we who used to do like news for prime time in the 90s, first time a morning show was coming. So we were told, do news you can use. That's the morning news, and the night news is usual politics news. And we didn't know what news you can use was. So I have a request to all of these young reporters and entertainers, fused into one here, that in these times, if you can all come up with a listicle on what to do with your hair in COVID times when you can't cut it. Because other than me, we have very, very neat hair. And I would like to know how they did that. And I'm sure all our news consumers would love to know that too. Because that is news you can use. Thanks, Sattvik. Thanks, Andre. Thanks, Pragya. And thank you, Chirag, for putting this together. It was a pleasure. So thank you for watching this joint creation between Roli Books, Roli Pulse, and Newslaundry. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Read more. It's good for your brain.